a quiet wedding in Nigeria almost slipped through unnoticed. No paparazzi, no TLC crew, not even a breadcrumb on Instagram. While the world was still catching their breath from the chaos of season 8, Michael Ilesanmi allegedly stood in front of a small group of family and made a vow not to Angela Deem, the woman whose name had been tied to his for nearly a decade, but to someone else entirely. No spin-off special, no tell-all, just silence. And then, like he vanished straight out of the franchise's hard drive, Michael was gone, not just off the show, off social media, out of contact with the network, ghosted the machine. Meanwhile, Angela, that meltdown on set wasn't the end, it was the ignition. And TLC, a network that once centered entire seasons around her name, suddenly went mute. No press release, no send-off, no reunion table camera angle. A woman who once dominated promos, segments, and ratings, quietly scrubbed. Welcome back to Sister Wives Daily, I'm Sarah. Subscribe now and drop your thoughts below, because what you're about to hear might be one of the biggest cover-ups in 90-day history. Or at least the loudest silence we've ever witnessed. Let's get into it. For years, Michael and Angela's toxic back and forth was a mainstay. Viewers loved to hate it. Producers thrived on it. Angela yelling through hotel hallways, accusing him of cheating, threatening to rip up marriage papers. Michael awkwardly smiling through tense scenes. Fans called it messy, some called it unhealthy, but TLC, they called it compelling. Until it became a liability. Something shifted though, and it wasn't obvious at first. Michael started pulling back long before anyone realized he was planning an actual exit. He was showing up less in filming, skipping confessionals, pausing contract talks. TLC chalked it up to stress, burnout, or maybe Angela getting in his head. But hindsight is brutal because now it's crystal clear he wasn't ghosting her, he was ghosting all of it. And while this might play like some dramatic breakup arc edited for cable, everyone who worked behind the scenes says this is different. This wasn't scripted chaos, it was a real fracture. Somewhere in between Angela screaming across reunion stages and Michael quietly dodging calls, the franchise lost its two most chaotic stars and barely whispered a word about either of them. Don't let the silence fool you though. Angela didn't leave quietly. Rumors say she arrived at her final shoot already set to explode. Allegedly furious at learning Michael would no-show filming, she turned on production instead. In front of cameras, in front of staff. Insiders say it was so volatile, someone actually called security. But what matters even more is what didn't happen. TLC didn't release a statement. Producers didn't tease her return. No press interviews, no follow-up angles. Angela was someone who'd been part of nearly every spin-off available. Pillow Talk, The Last Resort, Happily Ever After. Gone, overnight, like scrubbing a hard drive clean. And Michael? He didn't fight it. Didn't post to set the record straight. Didn't go live to share his side. He didn't even drop a cryptic quote. Insiders say he returned to Nigeria under the assumption it was temporary, to visit, to regroup, maybe even negotiate better terms. But something changed. Fast. Family expected him to circle back to the US, maybe refresh his visa process. Instead, word spread that he'd legally remarried, privately, quietly, and presumably without telling Angela or TLC. No social media, no photographer. Just this, he was done performing. For Angela, for viewers, for the show. Think about that. Michael, who spent nearly a decade building public fame off one relationship, allegedly chose to start over completely behind the scenes. While most reality stars hold on to clout with white knuckles, he let it go without a comment. And that leaves a giant question in the air. Why now? Angela raged on IG Live that Michael betrayed her. She sobbed, shouted, claimed she was ghosted. She baited follows, tagged cast members, picked fights she used to dominate for ratings. But TLC didn't bite. They issued soft denials through silence. Promos shifted, mentions pulled. And the storyline that once centered around them both, mysteriously erased. It wasn't just ghosting, it was deletion. Loyal fans started picking up on it quickly. Michael hadn't appeared in episode teasers. Angela's confessionals were sliced shorter than usual. Their social media engagement from the network fell off a cliff. Storylines that seemed to build toward their inevitable crash pivoted mid-season toward B-couples that were 5 steps less interesting. And that fuels the speculation. Did TLC always know this was coming? Was production quietly prepping for a fallout they couldn't stop? Or was there something about this breakup, this storyline, this specific pair, that felt more dangerous than usual? Keep watching, because the next piece of this story has nothing to do with fame, and everything to do with what broke Michael before he ever walked away. Before Michael disappeared without explanation, the signs were already blinking in plain sight, dim at first, then impossible to ignore. He didn't storm off a set with cameras chasing him. He didn't post a tell-all hinting at betrayal. What he did was scarier for producers. He started going quiet. You probably remember how Angela used to complain on camera that Michael didn't answer her calls. She framed it like a man pulling away from his wife. But those same complaints mirrored how production started feeling too. Missed check-ins, ignored messages, confessionals that never got scheduled. One production assistant reportedly said they began planning backups in case Michael bailed again. That wasn't the fire starter. That was the smoke months before the explosion. In his early appearances, it was clear Michael was trying. Awkward at times, yes, but there. Present. Playing along in scenes where Angela's temper became the main character. But something shifted seasons ago. His tone got flatter. Body language tighter. Fans noticed it too, the nervous laugh, the frozen half-smile, his eyes darting away during fights that felt bigger than entertainment. It stopped looking like a story about a difficult relationship and started looking like a man shrinking into survival mode. Publicly, Michael still showed up. Clips, social media tags, pixelated Zoom calls. But behind that was a growing refusal. Quiet resistance. Some crew members later said he'd begun pushing back on edits, allegedly arguing that his reactions were being exaggerated, that producers selectively muted Angela's worst moments while highlighting his. Now, whether that's completely true or not, we can't confirm. But what's important is he felt it. He believed the show was distorting the dynamic, and at some point, believing that becomes enough. Then came the breakdown in filming control. In past seasons, even when Angela was explosive, TLC felt like they had some grip on the chaos. But with Michael, they didn't. Production couldn't predict his responses anymore because he stopped giving them. He began opting out of emotional conversations, refusing to answer intimate questions during interviews, even retreating during key filming blocks when cameras flew to Nigeria. From a network perspective, that kind of resistance is a red flag. Viewers love a train wreck, sure, but only if the tracks are still attached. Michael was no longer cooperating with the narrative. And honestly, he didn't need to scream to say he was done. His silence worked just fine. The coldest part, there wasn't a final warning or dramatic confrontation. At least not one that aired. Michael simply stopped trying. Months before fans noticed anything wrong, he had already ghosted key production steps. And Angela either didn't know it yet, or refused to believe it. Insiders said that while Angela continued ramping up her presence, booking more features, doing multiple confessionals, Michael quietly slowed down every joint appearance. It's like he was unplugging cable by cable instead of pulling one dramatic plug. Behind the scenes, it wasn't one moment. It was months of missed emails, delayed callbacks, calls rescheduled or flat-out ignored. At one point, rumor has it production debated recasting the couple's segments altogether, phasing both out gently. But Angela's volatility was a massive ratings anchor, and that kept her in rotation far longer than The Office complaints ever recommended. As for Michael, they kept hoping he'd come back to the table, open a new storyline, renew the drama, like he always had, even when he clearly looked miserable. But by the time season schedules were being finalized, there was already a cold absence where his face would have gone. No talks, no one-on-ones, no effort to negotiate scenes. No one was officially fired at this point, but Michael had stopped playing. In every way that counted, his part of the show was already over. There's irony here, because most cast members cling to their time in the spotlight, even controversial ones. Infamy pays, but Michael, he was one of the few who turned down screen time while his name still trended. Not to protect a brand, but to reclaim his peace. Whether you liked Michael or not during his time on the show, you can't deny this. The man vanished from a billion-dollar franchise without demanding an episode to say goodbye. No Instagram story, no live, no statement. He didn't chase legacy or spin the exit, he just left. And that silence whispered louder than any of Angela's rants ever could. But here's where it gets even messier. Because while Michael disconnected, Angela did the exact opposite. And TLC wasn't ready for what came next. Somewhere in Nigeria, in a town with no production vans parked outside, no boom mics overhead, no directors yelling, "Reset," Michael Ilesanmi reportedly got married again. There were no flashing lights, no interviews, no television countdowns, just family, a few close friends, maybe even some neighbors who weren't entirely sure who he used to be in America. What matters is that it happened, And it happened in a way that deliberately erased everything 90 Day Fiancé trained us to expect. There's no official footage, no exclusive interview, no Instagram post with a trending hashtag. According to people present, Michael asked that no photos from the private ceremony be published. Allegedly, he didn't even notify TLC until well after the fact. Maybe not at all. The network sure hasn't said a word. And while we can't confirm every detail, multiple sources, both in Nigeria and close to the franchise, keep repeating the same truth. This wasn't a hookup or a rebound. It was a registered, legal marriage under Nigerian law, and most importantly, it was intentionally secret. This wasn't a low-budget wedding. It was a no-spotlight wedding. Now pause for a second. Think about that choice. Because you don't have to be a reality TV veteran to recognize what kind of content that could have made. Michael, controversial fan figure, returning home to wed a local woman after years of long-distance drama with Angela. That's ratings gold. In fact, TLC has built entire spin-offs around Les. But instead of cashing in, Michael allegedly ghosted both the producers and the fame. This isn't just about love. It looks a lot more like self-preservation. By all accounts, his new wife isn't into social media, doesn't want a visa, doesn't care for American fame, and wants absolutely nothing from the franchise that made Michael a household name across the US. In a time where reality stars marry for more exposure, Michael seems to have done the reverse. And that tells us more about his mindset than any selfie could. For years, his on-screen story was defined by noise. Noise from Angela. Noise from social media. Noise from that pressure to either perform submissiveness or be accused of manipulation. The loudness was constant. But this wedding, this second chapter, it landed like a whisper. And that whisper said he was done auditioning, not just for television, but for control over how he should speak, behave, feel. Insiders describe his request for privacy at the wedding as not just a boundary, but as protection. One person reportedly close to the event said Michael feared photos could spark retaliation, disbelief, or unwanted attention. He didn't want the ceremony hijacked by outrage. He wanted it preserved, safe, untouched by the shadow of his past relationship. And in fairness, after years of being edited next to explosive scenes, who could blame him? There's a strange, quiet strength in the way he left. He didn't try to salvage reputation points. He didn't rush to expose Angela. He didn't leak DMs or drop voice memos to sway viewer loyalty. He simply chose peace. And held that line, even when everyone was watching to see if he'd crack. Now, the timing is important here. Michael allegedly returned to Nigeria under the assumption of a brief stay, maybe to recharge, reconnect, or renegotiate. But sources say something shifted almost immediately after landing. His withdrawal from TLC became permanent. His communications with Angela, dormant. And the reboot of his personal life moved forward without reality TV interfering, possibly for the first time in over 6 years. Behind the curtain, some producers reportedly tried to reinitiate contact. Quiet feelers were extended, suggesting maybe a remote interview or a respectful closure confessional, but nothing stuck. According to one source, Michael wasn't angry, just unavailable. Not unreachable physically, emotionally unreachable. Like he'd already stepped over a line that made re-entry impossible. For a man once mocked for clout chasing, quitting fame without monetizing a word is a mic drop level plot twist. Still, not everyone was applauding. Back in the States, Angela was anything but silent. Her social media turned into a rolling crisis. 1 minute crying on TikTok lives, the next throwing accusations, shading castmates, calling out fake friends. Her brand didn't shift, it cranked up. The entrances got louder, the language more volatile, and the desperation more transparent. Angela may have lost a marriage, but she wasn't ready to lose attention. And where Michael responded to chaos by disappearing, Angela charged headfirst into it, carrying gasoline. As Michael was building something quiet, stable, far from cameras, Angela was about to flip the entire franchise on its head, publicly, painfully, and in a way that forced TLC to finally say, enough. There were warning signs before the cameras even rolled. Angela showed up to the set already on edge. Staff could tell her energy was agitated, charged, like she'd been holding back a storm all day. Everyone hoped it would stay contained. It didn't. This was supposed to be her final segment, the one where she'd give closure on her relationship with Michael. But when she found out, on location, that Michael wouldn't be filming with her, everything cracked. What followed wasn't heat-of-the-moment drama, it was combustion. And not the kind that gets clipped into a teaser. This one didn't air, it couldn't. Multiple insiders said Angela didn't just get upset, she exploded. She accused producers of protecting Michael, lying to her, setting her up. Staff tried to de-escalate, but that only seemed to push her further. Her voice got louder. The list of accusations got longer. At one point, she allegedly turned on a crew member, not physically, but with enough force that it triggered an HR-level red flag. What makes this moment important isn't just the outburst. It's how quickly the situation spiraled out of the control of the people paid to control chaos. Angela didn't stay in her marks. She reportedly started moving erratically through the set. She didn't listen to cues. She wouldn't stop shouting. Eyewitnesses say she hurled insults not just at production, but at staff who weren't even part of the conversation. Some of the words, unairable, it didn't feel like filming. According to one crew member, it felt like a hostile workplace. Security was called, not suggested, called. That almost never happens in a controlled studio space unless there's an actual threat to safety or order. And reportedly, even security had trouble getting her to calm down. After years of filming high-conflict scenes with Angela on other cast members, yelling, threatening, throwing accusations, TLC saw something that crossed a line none of them could edit around. The scheduled shoot was shut down. Staff were pulled from the staging area. Angela was removed from the premises, and in the days that followed, it wasn't just producers reviewing footage, legal stepped in. According to people close to the situation, the network screened everything from that day: raw audio, behind-the-scenes camera angles, cast and crew impact statements. What they saw shocked them more than what viewers had seen over multiple seasons combined. Because the truth wasn't that Angela had suddenly changed. It was that she hadn't. And now they couldn't frame it any other way. For years, Angela's volatility had been chalked up as good television. Her confrontational style wasn't discouraged, it was encouraged. Some even say it was banked on. But in that room, with no husband to play off of and no script to follow, the curtain dropped. And what TLC was left with was a liability, not a personality, not an asset, a risk. A staff member reportedly requested to be reassigned after the shoot. Others described the event as a breaking point. The network realized this wasn't about content anymore, this was about safety. Within days, internal meetings were held. Lawyers briefed executives, contracts were re-reviewed, and the decision came fast: Angela's time was over, not because of ratings, not even because of negative viewer feedback, but because continuing to feature her had become indefensible. Behind the scenes, whispers turned into confirmation. Angela Deem, once the face of multiple 90-day Fiancé titles, had been quietly let go. TLC didn't blast it in a press release. They didn't tweet an official goodbye. They just started re-editing episodes, pulling her back from promos, suppressing mentions. For the first time in years, they decided not to bet on the chaos. They shut the door. Angela, of course, did not go quietly. She went online. She lashed out, emotional live streams, impassioned TikToks, accusing Michael of betrayal, accusing the network of betrayal. To her fans, it looked like heartbreak. To insiders, it looked like escalation. Some even speculated she'd try to sue the network. But her contract, locked airtight with morality clauses and arbitration agreements, gave her little room to maneuver. The Angela machine had burned fast and loud, but now it had stalled. And for TLC, that shutdown wasn't the ending. It was only the beginning of a much deeper crisis. Because once they cut her, something else surfaced: years of behind-the-scenes complaints, buried footage, and whispered warnings about how far things had gone. And now, the network would have to face what it had long chosen to ignore. Once Angela was pulled from the set, things didn't just get quiet, they got clinical. TLC didn't blast out a statement or rush to deny anything. But behind closed doors, executive meetings turned into legal war rooms. Because this wasn't just about Angela yelling on set. It was the final straw in a long list of ignored red flags, complaints, and choices that suddenly looked like liabilities the network could no longer afford. The meltdown exposed something TLC had avoided dealing with for years. Angela had been the show's wild card: unpredictable, aggressive, loud, and undeniably full of viral soundbites. She electrified tell-alls, delivered the kind of chaos that trended on Mondays. Producers leaned into it. They booked her again and again. But privately, crew members were growing tired. Some were scared. They weren't dealing with a character. They were dealing with someone they no longer felt safe filming. People close to past productions say there had been years of incident reports involving Angela. Allegedly, some involved threats. Others, behavior that pushed the limits of what staff were trained to manage. But every time, it was easier to write another storyline than to pull the plug. Ratings forgave a lot. That forgiveness dried up after the on-set breakdown. When legal got involved, the floodgates opened. Complaints that had collected dust, comments from cast and crew describing toxic work environments, camera operators uncomfortable filming confrontations, producers caught in emotional crossfire, all of it came out. Reports were no longer whispers, they were evidence. Patterns no longer easy to ignore. Angela wasn't just a risk, she was a legal conversation now. According to one editor, production teams were told to begin surgically reworking content. Scenes that centered on Angela were clipped, downsized, sometimes erased altogether. Promotional materials were redesigned. Social media managers were instructed to reduce interactions connected to her image. Even her name was starting to disappear from episodic summaries and season previews. Angela had been one of their most recognizable faces, and now they were slowly scrubbing her from the brand. Contracts were re-examined. Cast NDAs were reinforced with sudden reminders. Sources say that after Angela was dropped, TLC quietly sent new guidance to current cast members about behavior standards. Not just on camera, but everywhere. On social media, at events, even in interviews. Because the network wasn't just shielding itself from PR fallout, it was protecting its structure. Angela had become a symbol of what the show used to tolerate and could no longer afford. Internally, it triggered bigger questions. If Angela had been allowed to keep crossing lines this long, what else had been mishandled? Producers were asked to review older footage. Editors flagged scenes that hadn't raised concern when they aired, but now looked different, harsher, messier, meaner. Complaints that never escalated suddenly had context. Nothing was safe anymore. What made it worse was Angela's own response. Rather than step back, regroup, or give the network space, she kept forcing herself into visibility. She kept going live, kept tweeting, kept tagging, throwing accusations at Michael, bragging about ratings, flipping between rage and desperation. Even fans who had once defended her started shifting. What once felt like entertainment now looked like deterioration. And TLC. They braced for backlash, but it never fully came, not because people weren't talking, but because, in many ways, the audience had already moved on. That might have been the harshest reality for Angela. Even in trying to force herself into the timeline, she was no longer the narrative. The network didn't ban her publicly. They didn't sue. They didn't leak statements to the press. They did something far more final. They ignored her. No more reunion specials. No unofficial promo bumps. No leaks about potential spin-offs. The door wasn't slammed. It was locked quietly and permanently. But professionally stepping out isn't the same as personally letting go. And for Angela, the fallout wasn't just about contracts or press silence. Because without the cameras, without TLC, without Michael, all Angela had left was her version of the story, and the question of who, if anyone, was still listening. Silence doesn't trend. It doesn't get you sponsors or hashtags. It doesn't get you sympathy from a fanbase trained to expect chaos. But it does one thing better than all of that: it protects peace. That quiet space Michael Ilesanmi retreated into after years of noise wasn't just about distance. It was about recovery. Because Michael didn't vanish for attention, he vanished for survival. After nearly a decade in the eye of a reality TV hurricane, he stepped off the stage without announcement. One day he was part of a fan-favorite, drama-loaded couple. The next he was unsearchable. No statements, no podcasts. He didn't even send out a passive-aggressive quote story. All the typical acts of a reality breakup were missing. Not because he forgot, but because he wanted out so badly, even the attention felt toxic. And that kind of exit only happens when someone's reached their absolute limit. People usually think silence means avoidance, like it's weak or indecisive. But in Michael's case, it may have been the strongest move he ever made. While Angela accused him of betrayal, while fans begged for the tea, while TLC scrambled to find a new anchor for the show's chaos, he said nothing. He allowed the story to move on without chasing influence over it, and in doing so, reclaimed the one thing reality TV almost never allows: his narrative. It wasn't always this way. Michael used to play by the rules. Smile for the camera, soften the blow when Angela erupted, try to maintain the "yes ma'am" image that kept him eligible for more screen time, more dialogue, more trips to the US. Some of it might have been strategic, for the show, for the visa, for stability. But eventually, even strategy cracks under emotional drain. And make no mistake, that drain was real. Off camera, insiders say Michael had grown noticeably more withdrawn during his last few filming cycles. He avoided confrontation. He skipped informal interviews. He turned down new opportunities quietly, with no explanation. One crew member said it was like watching someone fold themselves smaller and smaller just to survive another round. Not because he was weak, but because he had nothing left to give. Maybe the biggest surprise wasn't that he allegedly remarried. It's that he didn't use the wedding as a stage. For a man often portrayed as seeking fame, not capitalizing on his own breaking news tells a whole different story. We're used to reality stars milking every plot twist. Michael buried his, and he did it without shade. There was no tell-all about Angela's behavior, no compilation video of trauma. He didn't weaponize the audience's sympathy. That's not how most people remember 90-day cast exits, but it's exactly how someone ends a toxic pattern for good. He left the show. Then he left the conversation. Even TLC couldn't reach him after a while. Multiple insiders confirmed offers were extended. They wanted him to film a final confessional, not dramatic, just a clean goodbye, for context, for ratings, for storyline integrity. But Michael said no. Not rudely, not bitterly, just no, because staying silent wasn't about being mysterious. It was about boundaries that couldn't be cut into a B-roll. Since then, it's been radio silence. No interviews with bloggers. No chats with other cast members. He's not following the drama, not reposting old clips, not leaning into nostalgic fame. According to sources close to him, he's rebuilding from scratch in private. His reported new wife has no part in the reality machine, and apparently, that was deliberate. They want a life that doesn't hinge on audience reaction, a life that isn't edited into 6-second clips for shock value. And maybe that's the lesson hidden underneath the Michael we thought we knew. He was never the villain, never the hero, just a man who outgrew a system that demanded more drama than he was willing to give. But while Michael chose silence, Angela chose the opposite. And if you thought she was finished when TLC locked the door, you haven't seen what she did next. Because Angela didn't walk out of reality television, she kicked, screamed, and clawed at the door on her way down. And she's still not done knocking. Angela didn't fade into the background, she did the opposite. If Michael's silence was like turning the volume knob all the way down, Angela spun hers until it broke off in her hand. She was everywhere: TikTok lives, Instagram rants, cryptic comments on random cast members' posts, stitching videos from fans, even responding to trolls directly. She wasn't just active online, she was living there. And every swipe, every tear, every loud declaration felt like one thing: a desperate attempt to stay visible to a camera that had already stopped recording. One of the first things she did after Michael disappeared was go live, emotional, unfiltered, and giving the audience more confusion than clarity. Her followers were expecting updates or maybe accountability. What they got felt more like a rolling monologue starring a woman betrayed, and convinced the show still needed her. Angela cried, she shouted, she accused. Not just Michael, but anyone who stood too close to the fire. Production, castmates, even fans. And instead of shifting into reflection, she doubled down on what had worked in the past: high volume, fast insults, and picking sides. When new drama in the 90-day universe popped up between Rob War and Jasmine Pinda, Angela jumped in like it was her own storyline. She showed up in posts from other cast members, commented under trending clips, dropped casual hearts and flames under men half her age, and hinted, constantly, about returning to the screen. At one point, she even leaned hard into flirting with another cast member in comment sections, not subtly, almost like she was building her own audition tape in real time. To some fans, it was entertaining. To others, it was painful to watch. Because no matter how many TikToks she fired off or live streams she hosted, the invitations weren't coming. No new show, no spin-off deal, just views. And not the kind that hold weight in a network's boardroom. But what made it worse wasn't just the content. It was how erratic it became. She flipped between calling Michael a fraud and begging for sympathy. She'd post nostalgic love clips one night and glass-shattering rage the next. She tried to paint herself as the villain TLC created, then the victim they abandoned, all before breakfast. And somehow, it made the silence from the network that much louder. Because even as Angela treated social media like her second chance, TLC stayed quiet. Entire seasons moved forward without her face plastered in the promos. Cast reunions aired with no sign of her. Angela's bio stopped including the show's name. Her public tantrums kept hitting air but not airtime. But that didn't stop her. If anything, it escalated her online hustle. She talked about truth coming out, promised exclusive tea, even hinted she had dirt on people from behind the scenes. Viewers waited, nothing landed. Every week she tried a new storyline, a new feud, a new breadcrumb trail. But the engagement wasn't adding up to negotiations. TLC wasn't watching. They were washing their hands, and Angela didn't seem to know the difference. It's not that she lost her edge. It's that she never updated her strategy. Angela was still operating like she was sitting in the epicenter of the 90-day drama map, even while the show had rotated around her. New couples, new fights, new narratives. And Angela. She was stuck on repeat, shouting into a vacuum she didn't realize had been soundproofed. Even other cast members started keeping their distance. The likes fell off, the replies stopped, the collabs dried up. The more she tried to stir the pot, the more obvious it became. No one at the table had saved her seat. But the most revealing thing wasn't what she said, it was what she never stopped trying to prove, that she was still relevant. That the drama hadn't moved on. That the show couldn't function without her. Behind the scenes, sources say she truly believed a comeback was still possible. That if she stayed loud enough, long enough, they'd have to re-engage. That someone would crack. Give her one last tell-all, a redemption arc, anything. But what Angela still didn't understand is that TLC had already made up its mind. And they'd made it months ago. Because while she was fighting to be seen, the network was busy erasing everything that kept her on the screen in the first place. At first, Angela's meltdowns were brushed off as part of the package. Fans complained, sure, but they also watched. And that's what mattered. The producers noticed the ratings, not the discomfort. The more Angela screamed, the more comments flooded in. It was messy, it was chaotic, it was viral. But over time, the mood shifted. Audiences weren't just wincing anymore, they were warning. You could see the turning point in the forums. The comments became more frustrated than entertained. Clips that once sparked laughs got hit with long threads calling out emotional manipulation, verbal attacks, and what many believed had crossed the line from drama to abuse. Then, the petitions started. Not one or two, dozens, each gathering thousands of signatures, urging TLC to drop Angela from the franchise. People weren't overreacting to one edit, they were tracking a pattern. Season after season, Angela yelled at Michael, cut him off mid-sentence, accused him, insulted him, mocked him. And often, it aired without balance, as if he was supposed to take it, as if aggression from her was part of the entertainment deal. But viewers caught on. They called out the edit, the one that would show Angela snapping, then quickly cut to Michael with no context. It became harder and harder to ignore how one-sided the narrative looked. Over time, fans stopped seeing Angela as the funny firecracker and started recognizing her behavior as something darker. Even longtime defenders backed away. Fan pages that once supported her began pulling posts. Commenters started tagging TLC directly, demanding accountability. Some went further, writing long posts outlining what they called consistent emotional mistreatment, not just between scenes, but across seasons. People remembered her grabbing phones, yelling in public, clashing with other castmates. They remembered the way she cornered Michael on FaceTime, shouting while he stayed completely still, as if waiting it out. They remembered how often he apologized for things she exploded over. And the audience wasn't just upset, they were exhausted. The difference between drama and dysfunction is audience tolerance. And by the time her final season began airing, that tolerance had flatlined. Even more disturbing, several scenes Angela had once laughed off had suddenly aged into serious red flags. Fans went back to moments they'd overlooked and started reposting them with new captions. New angles, a new lens. What had been edited as intense now looked performative. What had been brushed off as jealousy suddenly appeared controlling. Viewers were watching with fresh eyes, and they didn't like what they saw. It wasn't cancelled culture. It was consequence culture. People wanted accountability. They wanted the network to stop pretending strong personalities were enough to excuse repeated disrespect. And they were no longer staying quiet about it. Social media turned brutally honest, not against Angela as a person, but against the way her behavior had been tolerated, highlighted, and monetized by TLC. Some fans even drew comparisons between Angela and other infamous reality stars who were eventually dropped after audience pressure. The difference? They argued TLC had waited too long. Ratings had won for years. But now, risk had finally caught up. There's a moment one fan posted that stuck. A clip compilation of Angela screaming at multiple cast members during reunion specials, overlaid with comments from editors who once joked that she kept the show alive. The caption read, "She didn't keep it alive. You just let her burn it louder." Angela's energy, once disruptive in a way that worked, had become destructive in a way the audience refused to co-sign. TLC had always lived in a gray zone. They didn't govern behavior, they captured it. But this time, fans expected something different. Because Angela wasn't the wildcard anymore. She was the blueprint of what reality TV decides to platform or protect itself from. And when she was finally removed, those same fans didn't throw a parade. They exhaled, quietly, like tension had finally left the room. This wasn't about personality clashes or bad edits. It was about a pattern of behavior that viewers no longer wanted normalized. And they let TLC know it in every comment, every signature, every post asking why it took so long. But what no one outside production knew at the time was why the decision felt so sudden. Because behind that curtain, something had already happened, something even the audience hadn't pieced together yet. And when it finally surfaced, the entire franchise would feel the fallout. Once Angela's final outburst forced TLC to step in, the fallout didn't end with her, it started with her. Behind the cameras, quiet changes were already being written into the DNA of 90 Day Fiancé, and not because the show suddenly wanted to become softer, because it had no choice. What happened with Angela wasn't an isolated PR scare. It was a wake-up call. Legal and production teams reportedly began combing through old contracts, reevaluating cast conduct standards, and rewriting NDAs with sharper, clearer enforcement language. Morality clauses that once felt like fine print were now front-page policy. The network couldn't afford another uncontrolled eruption, not just emotionally, but legally. One slip like hers could have landed the show in a liability nightmare. According to insiders, new protocols rolled out silently. Current cast members started receiving revised contracts, specific clauses about on-set behavior, verbal aggression, repeated refusals to follow safety instructions, even language around social media posts, what was tolerable, what could result in a call from legal, and what could get you cut from the series altogether. The word got around fast. The chaos was no longer the product, it was the risk. Production teams started operating with more caution. Editors were reportedly told to protect the franchise first. That meant reconsidering how certain behaviors were framed on screen. Not hiding the drama, but removing any sense that violence, physical or verbal, was being rewarded. Episodes started feeling different. Conflict didn't get as many lingering close-ups. Explosive scenes were trimmed or spaced between moments of calm. TLC wasn't sanitizing, but they were calculating, and cast members noticed. One participant allegedly joked that they put a leash on the storylines, while another admitted the new rules made them nervous, not because they planned to act out, but because they were used to working in a system that never said no. Even casting started shifting. Quietly, the franchise began phasing out personalities known for burning hot and fast. Less airtime, less promo presence, less overlap into multiple shows. Angela was once a centerpiece, more than a cast member. Now, producers seem to be avoiding creating another like her at all. Online, diehard fans sensed something changed. The show felt less volatile, the trainwreck factor dipped. But so did the backlash. It was subtle but effective. Instead of riding the edge of what could air, TLC stopped hovering near the line altogether. And it wasn't just about protecting viewers, it was about protecting the network. Angela's meltdown triggered a review, yes, but it also unearthed years of exposure the franchise had been ignoring. Crew quit during past seasons. Producers filed concerns that went unaddressed. Former cast who later accused the show of emotional exploitation. TLC had been walking a tightrope, banking on conflict while quietly absorbing the blowback behind closed doors. They couldn't afford to do that anymore. Internally, sources say meetings were held about brand safety. Network-level discussions about how to avoid encouraging the same power dynamics Angela represented, relationships where one partner dominated, yelled, silenced, and repeatedly disrespected the other, all while cues guided the cameras to frame it as drama, not dysfunction. For reality TV, that's a big shift, and it didn't come with a splashy announcement. It came with NDA resignings, clauses made stricter, risk assessment teams looped into filming decisions, and producers being told that from now on, escalation wasn't a storyline, it was a threat to the studio. While viewers waited for new spin-offs and familiar faces, TLC was, in quiet corners of the office, vetting scenes and re-editing footage to minimize exposure. Some segments were allegedly pulled at the last minute. Others were cut down to remove lines that crossed tone boundaries. One editor reportedly said they were under surgical pressure not to air anything that could later be seen as enabling bad behavior. And those cancellation rumors, they were never official, but they were real. Not about the entire franchise, but certain spin-offs, certain couples. the air around 90 Day wasn't as invincible anymore. The result? A series that felt more curated, more self-aware, still dramatic but not dangerous. Is it less fun for viewers who loved the chaos? Maybe in moments. But for the cast, the crew, and the network's legal teams, it's survival. The days of framing dysfunction as entertainment and hoping no one's filming the filming, those days are over. So the question now becomes, who thrives in this new version of 90 Day? Because the show survived by leaning into personalities like Angela, and now it has to rebuild without them. So, where does that leave the Queen of Chaos, and the man who walked away from fame before it could swallow him whole? Angela's silence didn't come from closure, it came from being shut out. Not by Michael, not really, but by the one machine that once called her irreplaceable. TLC didn't announce it loud. They just adjusted the lighting, cut the camera, and rewrote the cast list without saying her name. And for someone who fed off being watched, that kind of erasure hits harder than any headline. Angela's content kept rolling, videos, lives, selfies with fellow cast members, shade thrown with the same heat, but none of it stuck. Nothing reignited the thing she'd lost. Not fame, but access. She was loud, but in a space that no longer echoed back. Meanwhile, Michael was still gone, still choosing quiet over chaos, still refusing every invitation to re-enter the spotlight. No recycled footage to explain it. No public updates to reframe it, just stillness. And for someone whose every move was once dissected by fans, that silence became its own kind of statement. What's harder to understand from outside the frame is just how heavily these absences weigh behind the scenes. Among the remaining cast, there's a shift, not panic, but awareness. People are treading more carefully now, not because they're scared of the audience, but because they've seen how quickly TLC can pivot. High engagement isn't protection anymore. Being TV gold doesn't mean untouchable. And Angela, once the center of every promo, every reunion screamfest, every social media feud, is now a case study. A cautionary tale passed down in private production meetings. New couples are being handled differently. Conversations get buffered. Testimonies get screened. Reunions are less gladiator pit, more damage-controlled forum. The fire still burns, just lower, slower, with one eye constantly on the risk log. Some fans feel the difference. Others miss the chaos. There's debate online, did TLC go too soft or finally grow up? But maybe that's the price of a show surviving long enough to learn where the line is. Still, it leaves viewers with questions that won't go away. Could Angela have changed if given the space? Did the show build her up just to pull the plug when she became inconvenient? Or did things cross a line no one could walk back from? And Michael, was he ever going to be allowed to have a storyline beyond damage control? Or did his quiet exit speak more truth than any confessional ever could? Sometimes reality TV is a mirror. Other times, it's a meat grinder. And now, fans are left sorting through what pieces were performance and what pieces were pain. But even now, even after the contracts dried up and the cameras cut away, some part of this story still doesn't feel finished. That's the thing about silence. It doesn't wrap things up. It leaves them hanging, waiting for either a return or a reckoning. The question is no longer whether Michael or Angela will come back. It's whether the show can still recognize itself without them. They were the storyline once. Now they're the shadow behind it. And if Angela ever does return, it won't be the Angela America remembers. But it might be the one she fears. But there's one thing no one's explained, how Michael got to America in the first place. We finally found out, and you're going to want screenshots for this one.